That's so much of what this ends up being is like you're just trying to balance a lot of things.
It depends.
It depends. Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Open Hardware Manufacturing Podcast, the podcast about making open source hardware. My name is Stephen Haas.
And I'm Lucian Chapar.
And today we are talking about incorporating community feedback. So you have an open source project. You ideally have a community of a bunch of wonderful people that want to engage with it and want to help build it up, and trying to find the best way to pull that in and incorporate it and have it go into the project and pull it in as best as possible is tricky. So we go into talking about people that get nerd sniped with a cool engineering idea, taking the time to give everyone the benefit of the doubt on how they're describing things and assuming they mean well in the criticism that they give, how you kind of have to be the director of the path. You have to know where it has to go, and you have to be opinionated about where the project needs to go, but you also need to know when you don't know as much as other people, and trying to find that balance. And also that you should really show off when a community member adds something to the project and like they've added to it and how freaking awesome that is.
Yeah, making sure those people feel important is big.
Yep.
And we'll get more into it.
Yep. Making sure folks are aligned on the same page and the community is working with you in a nice symbiotic way. Y'all are jamming on trying to make the best thing you can. It's tricky, but it's very possible to do right, and it's really fun when it works.
And then Steven goes off the rails later and talks about plutonium.
I do. That is true. I do that.
I'm ready to get into it if you are.
Let's do it, man.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so there are three kind of like main chunks that we broke down accepting community feedback into, which are receiving the feedback, filtering that feedback, and then incorporating it into the project. So we'll start with receiving.
That sounds good.
Yeah, all the ways you actually kind of get in all the stuff from your community.
So like we've thought the first thing worth saying here is it's important to create a place where the community can engage with you and the project.
And there's a lot of different ways to do this. Like when we had Ryan on from V1 Engineering, we talked a lot about the differences of like we have a Discord server, which is mainly where our community hangs out. He has a forum, which works really, really well for him.
He loves that forum.
Yeah, it's cool. It has a lot of benefits. But what really matters is just that you have a place. Like there needs to be a place where people feel like they can discuss this stuff and like hang out and talk about these kinds of things.
Yeah, every project needs a watering hole.
Yes, a watering hole. That's a good way to say it. You need to find your watering hole. Have a spot where people feel like they can contribute there. Another good thing that we've done that we've really liked is we have a community mods page. We host it with Notion. It's anyone can just like add anything to this page. It's a community driven thing. It's really cool. It's nice. I mean, you could even make it a Google Docs page if you really wanted to, like just something where anyone can go and like, hey, I made this mod. I may not want to contribute it directly into mainline, but I want to put it out there in some capacity. It's a cool thing to do, and it's really been beneficial for us.
Yeah, even like the quiet folks that don't chime up in our Discord will just drop something revolutionary in there.
Yeah.
A real good way for people to share an idea quick.
Yeah, I think the Voron community has this. They actually have a dedicated GitHub repo, and you have to make a PR, and it gets merged into this beautiful website. It's really cool, but it's a little bit more friction to get it added in. I think that's kind of the reason why we lean more towards it's just a big document, it's just a page and anyone can go in and add stuff to it really easily.
Yeah, and I think that's true for the Voron mods repo as well. Like everyone has control over their own folder. The permissions are set up in a weird way, it seems.
Oh, okay. But you still have to use Git to add it. So it's a little more friction, but you do get a prettier output, Yeah,
it really helps groom how people list their stuff.
Yeah.
It makes it more easy to open. Like, with our mods page, we run into a lot of people like sharing an STL file or like sharing code that's not really runnable immediately. So
Yeah, it's a different balance, like you kind of want to have a place where people can just drop whatever they wanted to put out into the world. That's okay. Because, we get into this later with filtering and stuff. And even just in this section of receiving, you don't want to poo-poo anything. Like you want to have there be a place for all kinds of stuff to land.
Yeah.
So yeah, having a place, having a watering hole is huge. That's like the biggest possible thing you can do for making people feel like they can give you feedback.
Most definitely. And I think it's important to say for us, the most successful thing we have going is probably our Discord community.
Yeah, I think so. So if you have that place, that's great. But you also have to make sure in that watering hole, everyone knows that it is super okay to give your thoughts. Like there are some communities where you drop in an idea and people will immediately be like, no, that's stupid, blah, blah, blah. Like you can't do that. Or like, that's not a good idea or whatever. You need to be so abundantly clear that you're interested in hearing what people have to say and creating an environment where people feel comfortable to do that. That's super important.
Yeah, because people are I like to assume they're well-intentioned.
Yeah.
And like any criticism is really helpful. It's a gift. As long as it's not mean or like vicious.
Yeah. When I, in SuperCon 2023, I did a talk about like community stuff. It was more about the company. It was about a lot of stuff actually, but that was one of my biggest points is like criticism is a gift. As long as it's not like mean, if someone is saying, hey, this should be this way, I don't like the way that you did that. Like someone is taking the time out of their day to tell you about something they thought about your project. Like that is objectively a gift. They are taking their own limited amount of time on this planet to tell you about this thing. That's awesome. So like trying to approach that in a very grateful way and making sure that that vibe comes across in your community is so important to keep things feeling good there.
Yeah. And it's important to say here too, that the community requires maintenance. Like it needs to be groomed. You need to make sure you're not fostering a hostile environment. It can't be argumentative.
Yeah.
Like no bullies.
Yeah. No bullies is a good way to say it. Yeah. Cause like arguments are great as long as they're kind and civil, right? Like I do want to get into the weeds on like, no, I disagree. I think we should do it this way. And we have a good constructive conversation about it. But, you know, if someone's being overly critical and stuff, it can be really hard, you know, like to make a decision of like, no, this person is making the vibe bad and you might have to yeet somebody. You might have to remove someone from the community because they're creating a bad environment. And that's a really hard decision to make of like, okay, is this person making it difficult for other people to enjoy this community? It's really that's a tough thing, but you have to do it because then other people are like, oh, so this is the kind of place where we can be really hypercritical and that's not good.
Yeah, I've seen open source communities where after a negative person was removed, the like constructive comments like doubled in a day.
Yes, I've seen this exact thing too. Someone gets yeeted and everyone's like, oh, thank God. But people weren't speaking up about it. So you have to monitor that and make hard decisions. And it's never an easy cut and dry thing. It really never is. Or sometimes it is.
Yeah.
But most of the time, it's a messy thing to solve. But you got to do it because otherwise people are going to get super, super criticized. And that's not fun.
Yeah.
People only want to engage with that if it's actually fun to do it, you know?
And I'll say this too. If you're the maintainer of a project and you think someone in the community is like annoying or toxic or like not fun to engage with, chances are there's 10, 20, 30 people that feel the same. Like have the confidence that your bird eye view is accurate.
And ask other people in the community, like one-on-one in DMs or something like, how do you feel about this guy? I'm getting weird vibes. Is it just me? Or like, you know, talk with other people and get other people's opinions that you trust there. Cause it can really spoil a community. You know, it can make it so people don't feel like contributing or it doesn't feel like a cool place to hang out. That's what's important there is making it feel that way.
Yeah. And we got really good advice from one of our contributors, Thea, our star girl, told us once in reference to a bad apple. We don't do that here.
Yeah, a great phrase to use. I think there's like a whole blog post about it, about saying the phrase, we don't do that here. Like, and that phrase is useful because you're not making a comment about whether or not what they're doing is right. That's not what's up for debate here. What you're doing there is you're setting a boundary about what is this community? We don't do that here, in that might be fine elsewhere, but here that's not acceptable. Yeah. And I love that phrase. I think there's a blog post. If I can find it, we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah, I think we use that quite a bit as kind of a reference that we discuss often. It's great. Yeah, it's a good tool.
And we found by saying to like crankier people, we don't do that here. You're not challenging their ideology. You're just saying, I need you to do this to fit in.
Yeah.
And it's easier for them to receive that and accept it.
It is. Yeah. And you know, if you come at someone with hey, this is completely unacceptable, blah, 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 that might be true.
Yeah.
But that can really seed, not a fight, but argument about that. And if it's like I hear you, this is not how we do things here. It's a real clean way to be like, you're still welcome here if you follow our rules. But that's tough. This is one of the harder ones of like, you got to draw the line. Is it going to be good for the community or not? It's tough. It's tough. It will start to get tricky. The more people that come into a community, the harder it gets. Just how it goes.
And sometimes you'll find that some people receive this feedback really well. And in us dealing with this, we've learned that not everyone communicates the same. Many people talk differently, but like hopefully people in your community mean well and they're well intentioned.
Yeah. Yeah. This is when there have been times where I've had to talk to a person in the community of like, hey, you're kind of grating people's gears here, grating grinding their gears. I don't know. I said that weird. You know, your people are taking issue with the way you're communicating about this. They're like, really? Like, they don't know that that's how it's coming across. You know, it's just a communication issue, and text is really hard. So trying to find a way to say, hey, yeah, I know that it doesn't feel that way. I still need you to change the way that you're talking so that people don't interpret it that way. It's tricky.
This can be hard for people.
Yeah.
As an example, like it's been our experience that people where English is their second or third language might not come off how they intend.
Yes. Yeah. If there's a language barrier, it can be really hard to make sure like they may not have the same context that we might about how a phrase is interpreted because, you know, it's an ESL thing, you know, if we had a German, mainly German community and I'm coming into this community as German is my second language, I'm not going to be saying things in a way that makes a lot of sense, probably, or maybe not. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm not as experienced with language, and it's going to come across differently.
Yeah.
So just be aware that like not everybody is necessarily on the same page with you in terms of how things are interpreted, and they probably mean well. And it's just a communication barrier. Text is imperfect. You don't know about what their background is for language. Just keep that in mind when you're handling some of these things too, because it depends.
Yeah. If someone means to say an idea is bad, it might come off as the ideator is bad.
Yeah.
And they probably don't mean that.
And probably not. Yeah. Like there's a lot of cultural and language differences that give people grace.
Yeah.
They probably mean well. If they're repeatedly doing it in a way and you've said, hey, I think this is coming across a little hot, maybe try and change the way you say it. And it's clear they're really just trying to be mean. Okay, then you pull the trigger. But give people grace there. You don't know what their situation is necessarily. Assume they mean good to start.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think it's genuinely worth straining yourself to understand what someone's trying to convey.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. Because again, they're taking the time to tell it to you. That's huge. Like try and receive that as much as you possibly can. Even if it stings a little bit, the way it happens to come across, they're still giving you that gift of feedback, of information, of expertise. So like do everything you can to pull that in, and showing other people that you do that means you're also perpetuating a community that is open to the idea of giving feedback, which is exactly what you want. So, you know, you kind of have to walk the walk here.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. Not getting defensive.
I used to be a part of a Nerf Blaster forum where there was a really strict standard for posting. Like they had to have good grammar, punctuation, capitalization.
No way. Really?
Yeah.
Is this Nerf Haven?
Yeah, it was.
Wow. I didn't realize they had such a standard.
And it was amazing. They made a lot of young contributors really improve their written language.
Really?
But in a way, it was a bit of gatekeeping.
A little bit. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So it's been a lesson to me of like, oh, maybe that wasn't the best. It was good for readability, but in letting everyone share their ideas, like you need to look past bad grammar sometimes.
Right. Text is imperfect. And that's okay. Just, you know, be understanding of that. That's really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes I use more emojis than I might need to if I don't think someone has a full grasp of each word I say.
Right. Yeah. Because those are much more universal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Especially dealing with the vendors. But that's a side point.
Interesting. Yeah. That's a really good point. So yeah, just be understanding people are coming from a different place. Try and accept it as much as you can. Give people the benefit of the doubt. I think that's the biggest takeaway here.
Yeah. And our next point here is you'll definitely get feedback on how things are unclear or hard to understand. And like the importance of taking that seriously and addressing them. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially in regards to like how you might run the community. Almost all of the things that we have available are because the community was like, hey, I want this. So like the mods page only exists because someone was like, hey, it'd be cool to put my mods somewhere. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. We should do that. The design decisions page, which we get into a little bit later, we have that for that reason. Contribution guidelines exist because people are like, how do I know how to contribute? Development status page. I got this note 4 weeks ago, and I made that page just recently. The project's been around for over 4 years, and people are still giving us feedback of like, hey, this is kind of unclear to me. I should probably do it this way. It'd be cool if you did this. And I'm like, oh, great idea. And then we incorporate it. So you are not in a place to know what's helpful because you're at the center of the project. You don't know what's hard to understand because it's all in your brain already. Newcomers are these golden little, you know, they get one pass at being a first time member of the community, and every bit of feedback they give you, you should take it. It's like this, you know, ethereal glimmer of a note that you get. And that's something that you should listen to really strictly because anyone that's been in the community is going to be a little blind to this because they've already kind of learned it. So take that stuff seriously.
And like, maybe that means you should put yourself in an incognito browser window, look up the project, and imagine you're a newcomer to it and see like, okay, is there a good roadmap for joining the community, adding to it, knowing how you could help in the next 2 hours.
Yeah, I actually did something like this pretty similarly for our Discord page. And I realized it still said, welcome to the Index community.
Oh, no.
Because I have a bot, Me6 or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And, I changed the name of everything else, but I never go in and edit the settings on that bot. And I'm like, oh, man, this is out of date. So I go and I check it out. Bunch of stuff was out of date. So I went in, I just did a full audit of like refreshing it. So it's good to do it every once in a while. Just make sure it's sensible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this is one of the biggest ones for like your receiving feedback and making sure that what you're getting is kind of on track here is making a design guidelines and a design decisions document. And the point of this is to help pre-filter what you receive. Mm-hmm. As the leader of an open source project, you need to be opinionated. You're going to have to get comfy with saying no. It's going to be hard to do it, but you need to be the one who knows where the project is going to go. And you also need to know when you're out of your depths. And I don't know what we should do here. I'm now sourcing feedback for this thing, but on some things you do need to be opinionated and you do need to take a stance. And these documents do that. So we have a design decisions document for the feeder and the lumen. Mm-hmm. And it outlines, this is why we made this decision this way. Great example of this one. We got so many notes about this, especially in the early days about feeder addressing. Oh, you don't need a one-wire EEPROM on the slot for the feeders. The feeders need to know where they are on the machine. We use a little EEPROM for it. People are like, use a voltage divider or the resistor, use this other interesting technique, use blah, 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 blah. There are like 85 different dependencies that go into this decision. And a lot of the people that are giving these notes just came to the project and they know about 6 of these dependencies. They don't know the whole scope of it. So the point of this document is to lay out all of those dependencies so anyone new to the project can be on the same page immediately. And they're on the same page with you. And that makes sure that any contributions you get are coming from someone that's already up to date. And that helps so much. They don't waste their time. They know, oh, they went down this path already. I'm not breaking new ground. I get why they did that. Maybe they still disagree with you. That's fine. As long as they're on the same page, that's what's important.
Definitely agree with that. And I actually have a question for you, Stephen, here.
Okay.
So how do you handle contributors having strong opinions about things you're less knowledgeable on?
It depends on the thing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes if there's something that I really don't know a lot about, and I say this a lot, I'm a generalist. I'm okay at all 3 of the big engineering disciplines. I'm not great at any of them. I'm okay at all of them. I can get it working, but getting it working fully correctly, community help, other people who are smarter than me is what gets it there. So I know enough to be dangerous, but there's some things where I truly just don't know. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So it comes down to there's a few people that I really, really do trust on them not, and we get into this a little bit later with the filtering of like getting nerd sniped by something. We also talked about this in the PRD episode of like, are they stoked about this just because it's an interesting engineering challenge, or is it actually pragmatically the best thing to do? That's the thing I'm most concerned about when I'm receiving feedback on things I don't understand as deeply as they do is like, do they want to do it this way because it's interesting or because it's pragmatically the best? Is it overkill for what we need? And we could actually save quite a bit of money by using something cheaper. That's where I go. So there's a couple people that I know are smarter than I am, and they have that pragmatism in them that I use for reference. And I once they tell me, some people in the community tell me what they think that I should do, I do a lot of research about that approach as well to try and get up to speed on it. They kind of point me in the direction of where they're suggesting. And then I kind of dive in from that point. But I don't know. How about you? Because we both experience this. It's not just a Steven thing.
Yeah. And it's a little bit more mechanical to me based on how I contribute to a lot of projects. I definitely go to the friends with more experience and people that aren't involved in like the project we're talking about. Yeah.
They're coming into it with kind of beginner's mind.
Yeah. Like I might go to my friend Brad, who professionally designs Nerf blasters, and be like, hey, is this flexure or this like mode of fixturing things together practical?
Especially Brad, because we call him the Oracle.
Yes.
He's a great person to ask.
I love that, man.
Yeah, he's great.
So like going to outsiders for your opinions here and like,
yep,
someone who doesn't care about how shiny a potential route is.
Right. Yeah. And actually that can be really helpful. My buddy Alex, I'll talk to him. He may not have as deep of a technical understanding, but he's beautifully pragmatic about a lot of stuff. So he'll give me really strong pushback against some of those things because that's his perspective. He doesn't have the technical side of, he has incredibly deep technical understanding of different stuff, just not necessarily the pick and place architecture. So that's really helpful there too.
Yeah. And I brought this up because I think it's these types of questions or problems that can arise when you're going to the unwritten section of design guidelines or like the unwritten section of design decisions, like what's to be determined.
Right. Yeah. Like what have we not decided yet of how it should be structured? Yeah. Another reason to be really clear about these contribution guidelines is that it's going to make it so that when people do make a contribution, people know that it's valid and like it's going to be accepted. The worst thing ever is when someone makes a big complicated PR and it's something you can't merge because they didn't consider some huge thing, but they spent all this time on it. Oh, that's heartbreaking. So like you don't want to look at this big beefy PR and be like, sorry, I can't merge this. Give people all the information to be successful of like, hey, this is what constitutes a merge. You need to do, if you want to merge, here's what you have to do. So having a contributing guidelines page is like so important. So if you get a PR, you can be like, hey, this is the way we do this, and people have a fighting chance of getting something merged, It's kind of rude to not, I don't know if it's rude, but it's like,
it's required.
Should. Yeah. Like have people have a chance of contributing.
Yeah, this might be extreme, but if you don't show people how to help, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like people are not just going to come in and figure it out. Like you want to grease the skids as much as you possibly can to make it so that people are stoked, feel empowered to have all the information they need to contribute to your project. Make it feel so easy to do. There's another aspect of this as well, where some people don't actually want to make the actual change to the source. And that's why, a watering hole is great because they're like, it'd be cool if X, Y, Z. And then you can take that idea.
Write that down.
Exactly. Write it down. Implement that. You can implement it. But then there's some people who may not have an idea about how to change things, but they have expertise and they don't quite know where to point it. So I think maybe a year ago now, we made a role in Discord called the Review Squad. And anyone that joins the Discord can sign up for it just by reacting with an emoji to a certain message. You can set this up with a Discord bot pretty easily. So if I'm like, hey, I don't know what to do for the circuit board or whatever, like I want feedback on this thing, I can just ping this group of people who have effectively raised their hand and said, yeah, I'll help you. I'll help you with feedback on things. And I can ask them for their eyeballs on it.
And it's been fantastic.
It's so cool because a lot of people want to help, but they're not going to dive in and like find a problem. They just generally want to be available for help. And that's a great way to, when you have something you're like, I don't know what to do, you can poke those people and they're like, heck yeah, a thing for me to put my brain on. Having a group like that has been so nice.
I think the first time you used it for motherboards, you got like 40 GitHub issues created from your desired template with all of their issues formatted the correct way and contributive, meaningful, digestive ideas.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
It wasn't quite 40, but it was a ton.
Yeah.
It was and a lot of good discussion happening in the thread of like, because a lot of people don't check Discord or a forum very often. So like having a way to have people sign up, maybe it's an email newsletter, or like some other way to notify people about this kind of thing. They all come together. You're like, hey, it's a call for feedback. You want to help contribute? Now's the time. Get your hiney in here and take a peek. Some people aren't checking the Discord server every day to know what's happening every day. That's okay. Make a support for them as well, where you can kind of call on them. Yeah, the Review Squad has been awesome. It's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd love to try pinging them for help making a decision. Like before we have something to share. Be like, hey, we're trying this protocol or that. Or linear rail here versus linear motor.
Right.
Something.
Not necessarily reviewing a PCB, but just like, hey, y'all, what do you think about this in general?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a cool thing. It's just a bunch of people that want to help. They want to add their 2 cents. That's great. And you shouldn't add everyone in a server.
Yeah, no.
So this is a nicer way to kind of filter it to the people who are like down to get pinged,
Yeah. And I say this a lot from our vantage point. Like if we have people that want to help, figure out how to let them help.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Make it as easy as possible for them to do it.
Like harness that.
Yeah. So a lot of this about trying to get stuff in is about decisions you've already made and getting people on the same page. Like, for example, the one wire EEPROM for the feeders is an example we use all the time about this. But it can also really help if people are trying to work on new features, making sure that you're very communicative about the roadmap for the project. And even more close to the present than that, what is literally actively being worked on, which is something I actually just added in a couple weeks ago, is having an up-to-date, this is what everyone's working on. This is the meta. This is what's occurring right now. So being really clear about eventually this is where we want to be. So people also know, like, is my decision, is my PR getting us closer to that? Like, if that's ultimately the end goal, you got to make sure that what you're working on is moving you there. Cause that decides whether or not you merge it. Does it get you closer to your end goal of building this thing out?
Yeah. I believe that people make the best decisions when they have the ability to like see the full context.
Yeah, totally.
I don't like siloing people and putting blinders on them. I
Right.
think the more you can clue people into the big picture, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't think it's necessary to be cagey about next steps with things in almost all circumstances. Like, being clear about where you want to go is great. Make sure that people are on the same page as you and your contributions are valid and are in line with that. Yeah, okay, there's some times where maybe you need to do that, but for the most part, being communicative about that helps your community understand what to be working on. And like working with them and having them be part of the team is good there. I think our current roadmap is like actually kind of weak sauce because we checked off most of the milestones.
We did it.
So
I'm going to check it.
Now we're kind of like, I think we had like good feeder solution. That's checked off. I actually might have deleted it because we did a lot of them.
Yeah, it was misleading because it said like, oh, we're going to make a conveyor belt. It used to say we're making a conveyor belt.
I did change really that. But then we had like reflow oven, and then that kind of didn't make a lot of sense to pursue right now. So what I really need to do is just update it. But so this is a great example of like, we should make sure this is updated. This is a good thing to make sure that you have accurate. So people that are contributing know, yep, this is in line with what we're trying to do.
That was a fun one. I love checking things off.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it was cool checking them all off, but you know, that's a big part of it. And having a current development status so people know, hey, is this actively being worked on? If not, cool. This is a thing I can step into. This is a thing I can start working on because it's open and no one's working on it, or who to talk to if I do want to start working on this part, you know?
Yeah, the person asking this question was thinking about a bunch of ESP, like online connected devices with like a web interface, and was having a lot of trouble making sure all the software contributors were fully imagining like, what's that dashboard ecosystem look like? What's the web framework we use, and like keeping people on the same page and making decisions for framework that would take them in the right direction and not make future ideas harder for themselves.
Yeah. That one's tough. If you have a lot of opinionated folks coming in on that kind of thing, you ultimately need to be the one who sees in your mind's eye, what does that dashboard look like? How is it solving the problem? What is it accomplishing smoothly?
Yeah.
And you got to have a lot of people in your ear, and then you pick, and that's what it is. Because if you let everyone's just kind of skittering about, someone has to be at the helm of the ship, right? It's possible for there to be many, but if those many people are not fully aligned already, someone needs to be steering. Yeah. Someone needs to know where it needs to go. So yeah, for them, I'd say, weigh all the options, pick one, and decide. Make it definitive. That's what we're doing. And then everyone now knows, okay, if they don't like it and they hate that platform and they don't want it, okay, that's part of what you get by making a decision. But also you're aligned on that. And all the people who are like, okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll use that.
Yeah.
They all know exactly what to spend time on. Like, it's worth it.
Yeah, I'm trying this on in response. Like, making a decision and moving forward is usually better than like not driving the car and wavering. Yes.
One of Lucian, you're my favorite people on the planet was your old boss at Forum Labs.
Yeah.
Sean. Awesome guy.
Yeah.
And he said this quote to me one time that absolutely rocked my world. He said, you can fire me for making the wrong decision, but you'll never fire me for not making a decision. I think about that a lot. It was actually in regards to when COVID was starting, and there was not a lot of direction on whether or not we should go home, and he just made the decision, everyone go home. And I was like, can you just do that? And he's like, I made a decision. I just decided. I'm not going to take inaction. I'm going to make a decision, and I'm going to choose it, and I'm going to go with it. I had so much respect for him, not only for being like, no, I care about the safety of my team, but also like he just made a choice. He took a stand. I love that. Yeah. He's such a cool guy. But it also stands for making an engineering decision. Weird analogy. If you have a hose, you're not cutting anything in half with a hose.
Yeah.
It's just water. But if you have a pressure washer, you're cleaning something. If you have a water jet, you're cutting through metal. You have to focus all of that water flow into a really precise point to get good work done. And that comes from making a decision. If that water stream is splayed out everywhere, you can get a lot more done with that same amount of water by pointing it at one place. So trying to filter that is, you might cut the wrong thing. That's okay. You can always cut again.
Yeah.
You can be like, well, we really tried this thing and it didn't work out great. Let's move on. Let's cut another piece of steel. Let's switch. We tried it. It didn't work.
And that's probably an easier place to build from, like continue onward from.
Right. Yeah. Then this kind of random scatter shot where no one knows what's going on. And like, you got to provide that structure for your group. You got to make that decision. You can't let the boat coast. You got to steer it.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that a lot here.
Yeah. So that's receiving it. So now you have feedback.
And speaking of feedback, we're going to take a quick break for a commercial sponsor.
Yes, this episode's sponsor is PCBWay. PCBWay will give you feedback on your design. So after you export your board and you put it online, they actually have an engineer review it for you to make sure that it's generally what you're looking for, which has saved us a ton of time in the past. They also get your boards made really quickly, and we usually get our prototype boards in about under a week, which is really helpful for being able to iterate quickly. PCBWay has been really, really helpful to us for trying to get designs out the door and fabricated quickly. Thank you so much to PCBWay for sponsoring this episode. You got people who are giving you thoughts in the community. They have opinions. And now, after you do your first bout of design in an open source project and you kind of release it to the world and you put it out on GitHub and all that stuff, your role should shift, not completely, but very heavily into filtering and less about designing things. The general populace of a community is objectively smarter than you. So your time can really be much better spent listening to them and picking and choosing which notes of feedback are best rather than trying to do it all yourself. There's always exceptions, but that's generally worked super well for us, is kind of going into this filtering mode. And like, we still do a lot of design engineering, but when people give us points for architecture, maybe not how to route this specific trace, but like, what buck converter do we use? Broader stuff, to pull an analogy.
And at like a higher level, the Lumen we sold after the kit was really informed by feedback we got about the BYOP, what we read people saying in the Discord, what issues people made in the GitHub repo.
Right. Yeah, exactly. We had a guy who is just now putting together his V2 kit, and he's like, oh, it's great putting it together, but that cable harness stinks. He was not the only person that said that. So we started doing that for people because it really stunk. We got a huge note. Yeah, we had to sheathe that cable harness ourselves. It stunk. We do that now. So you do kind of want to shift more into filtering it.
And it's hard too, because you'll be filtering suggestions, comments, or messages from people who might not have the full subset of constraints in mind. They might not see the full picture. They might not have every consideration that you do.
Right.
For example, someone might not think, no one thinks about our packaging.
Yes.
Like, Lucian, why isn't the front and back legs extensions just built into the front and back leg? Well, the packaging existed before the idea of raising the machine's height 50 millimeter.
Right. The box is designed around that size. We'd have to change the artwork on the box. We have thousands of dollars tied up in that box. We have many thousands of dollars tied up in the die that cuts the foam and the process and the company and the factory and the contract for making that packaging.
And can you imagine if our contributing guide said, hey, update our die line.dxf if you want to update the silhouette of a given assembly?
Right.
It just won't.
And that's not their job.
Yeah.
They don't and probably shouldn't care about that. That's kind of an us problem.
Yeah.
But that's okay. People that give you these contributions, they shouldn't have all these constraints in mind. Like the one of my favorite ones is like, we had a conversation about like, we should change this bolt to Torx.
Mm-hmm.
So someone could just be like, hey, I like Torx better. We should change it to Torx in the community.
Great idea.
Great idea. Okay. So that Torx screw is on these 3 products. Okay. We ship an Allen key set with the getting started kit of all these products. If we ship a replacement part or an add-on upgrade kit that has that Torx driver, we don't know if that person has got a machine that had that Torx driver included if we start shipping with that Torx driver. Okay, what if they get that kit, but they had an older version of the machine without the Torx driver? We're now set. Okay, fine. Then we just send that Torx driver with that upgrade kit. Okay, but what if they have a new machine and we're sending that Torx driver upgrade to everyone that already has that Torx driver? There are so many dependencies and combinatorics. I don't know if that's a word, but
interdependent.
Just all the multitude of combinations and dependencies of all existing users.
Yeah.
It is so complicated. We can't possibly expect for somebody to have that in mind of like, oh, but the Opulo guys would have to think about what driver they ship. And what about the older people that didn't have that driver? We can't expect people to think about that, but that's our job to think about it. So you're filtering a lot just based on like the logistics of what it actually means to like build, calibrate, support, ship that thing.
Yeah, I might even say here, if you find yourself filtering a lot of suggestions that can't make the cut for like a packaging reason, maybe upstream and contributing guidelines update that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Just say, hey, we're going to have a really hard time merging anything that changes the outline of the machine from this DXF. And we just add the die line cut.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, this is literally what we're working with here. It's going to be really hard to merge this upstream unless that's the case. Or maybe something else, because we can still do that. I don't want to necessarily limit people to that. But if we have a hard and fast rule, something more strict than just changing a die, which honestly is not that bad, we could put that in the contributing guidelines.
Yeah. And like final point on that one for now, like the people are really passionate to contribute. And if you filter them out continuously, they're going to stop. Like we had to tell people we do not like the one wire EEPROM is the meta for our feeder blade. Yeah. Done. Now those smart people can contribute other suggestions and they're not going to continually get filtered out on a finalized design decision.
Exactly. Yeah. If it's like, it's this way, you're going to have such a crazy compelling point. Because look at all this research we did here to point this. They're going to go off to something else, some other cool thing that's tricky and some other problem to solve.
So like, just make sure, try to catch people before they're filtered.
Yeah.
And redirect their energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, be cognizant of the fact that almost all these contributions won't have every single one of those constraints attached to it. And it's your job to think about those things and be like, I hear where they're coming from, but it wouldn't work because our packaging, because of our, whatever other process it is.
Just try to harness the fact that people are really excited about engineering possibilities. And just because they're not visualizing every constraint doesn't mean it's a bad idea.
Right.
Like some people have really pragmatic ideas and some people want to make something fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. I think we talked about this quite a lot in the PRD episode of getting nerd sniped. Mm-hmm. Of like some things, like for us, this is our livelihood. It's our lives over the past however forever long. Yes. Is around this thing. But for some people, it's like a fun thing they want to hack. Mm-hmm. And that's rad. That's great. But what they do to it may be more of an engineering exercise and less of like, it's pragmatically making it better for everybody else. And that's okay. But knowing when to see that someone's getting nerd sniped by a thing and be like, that's rad, make that a mod. We can't merge that in the mainline because like it's way more expensive and doesn't add any value. Is usually kind of where it goes, or it's way harder to implement. It's cool, but it's way harder to implement.
Yeah.
Way longer to test. These kinds of things. Know how to filter that kind of stuff out. Expect there's going to be some of that for an engineering thing. Some people are going to get nerd sniped by this cool thing. That's rad. Know when to identify that.
Yeah.
And maybe not implement it. And keep looking back to your PRD.
Yeah. Towards that, the people that are like pursuing a really shiny, crazy, like almost quirky or lucrative idea that won't fit in. Like I love giving them a little bit of like redirection. Like, hey, Ben, this tool head you're making, that's insane. I could never merge that. But if it bolts up to the existing lumen, it'd be a lot more mergeable in the future. You keep cooking.
Yeah.
Let them cook.
Yeah.
But hey, Ben, you need it to be able to bolt right on and be a drop-in change.
Yeah. If someone has a lot of energy behind, hey, I want to do it this way, I want to try this cool thing. If out of the gate, it's never going to get merged. And maybe they're okay with that. Maybe it's just for them and they don't really ever care about getting it merged into mainline. That's okay too. But if they have an intention to merge it, make sure you catch them early of like, hey, it's going to be really hard for us to do this, or it's not super pragmatic to do it this way unless XYZ. Yeah. And kind of, give them a little bit of a push in that way so that they don't put in all this work and then they make their big fancy PR and then it's like, no, we can't use any of this. Like that stinks.
Yeah.
That totally stinks. So yeah.
Maybe it's sneaky of me, but what I like to do for these really creative like hackers of the lumen, I love sending them parts. Like I love sending them the standard production parts. And if they have them in hand, they will build around it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hey, I have 10 grand of this motor. I see what you're doing. I need you to use this motor if you want it. Yeah. What's your address?
Yeah. We'll send them to you. If it's not changing their design so much and they're still down to like mess with it, give them the hardware. They're part of your engineering team. Mm-hmm. Hook them up, clue them in, get them aligned on going in that direction. Again, if they want to merge, a lot of the mods, people just do it for fun.
Yeah.
They're not trying to get into mainline, and that's great. But if they're like really intentionally trying to get it into the project, hook them up with some hardware, get them on that page.
It's an investment to support them.
Yeah.
And like, even if they're pursuing like a moonshot project, like, hook it up.
Hook it up. If that moonshot pans out, cool. You've been making sure it's supported in the ecosystem, and it's like, it's going to be a viable thing from the beginning, you know? And maybe people are like, nah, I'm just going to do what I want. That's okay too.
Yeah.
But if they really want to contribute in that way, send them that stuff. Get them on the same page.
Yeah.
You know, bring them into the development cycle of the thing.
Enforce them to these people that need to like show their work, showcase it, document it, put it somewhere. So like, cause it's just as important to show what doesn't work as what did work. Yeah.
If someone goes down a moonshot and, you know, whether they're trying to merge it into mainline or not, in your community, look at what they did and be like, oh, this didn't work. And like, it can save you a lot of time of just looking at what your community tried and what failed, so that you don't go down an R&D path like that as well. You know, it's interesting. Like, don't just let it, I guess the thesis of this is, don't just let it happen and monitor it. Be included and involved with the development of it. There's some really cool folks in our community who are taking the slot that we have on the Lumen, and they're taking a different feeder design and modifying it to talk Photon and talk on our feeder bus. It's so cool. They're integrating into this existing system that we had. I was part of, you know, hey, maybe try it this way, do this, here's the pinout. And like, you know, I wasn't helping with the actual design of the thing, but I was, you know, talking with them and working with them for what they were trying to accomplish there.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, like that's such a cool thing that they're doing. Help them along in that process.
And you making sure that they build something interoperable of our existing architecture, existing design decisions. It's so important. Yeah. Cause oh man, I imagine the bifurcation of like, oh, we need the slot. The slot has to be at like a 20% different angle. Oh, well, now people need to have two different angles, and we want to support community stuff. Yeah.
But it makes it so much more difficult to support it if there's some weird bifurcation there.
Yeah.
You know, so like trying to, and this also goes into designing your stuff around making it easy for people to interface it with. Like, I intentionally tried to make the slot interface, make it so that anyone could use the same connector, have it attach on in the same way, and they could build whatever feeder they want that interfaces with it. The protocol is open source. I give it 24 volts, so it can power pretty much anything. It's open season, you know?
Yeah.
So trying to make it so that people have an easy time of integrating with it too is going to help as well.
For sure. An analogy is forming in my head. This one might be a real stinker, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
But open source project is constantly splintering, and it's your job to like patch it and prevent it from splintering off in the wrong direction. But like each time it splinters, it might go somewhere better or worse. And it's the job of the maintainer to like follow the right path.
Right. Yeah. I think I 3/4 agree with that.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the splinters are rad. Like, you get cool forks of stuff. You know, like I think about Elena Cat and her wide body mod. Like 3 or 4 people have built that.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, there's a mod to the Lumen that just makes it wide.
Big
like
boy.
It's big boy.
Yeah, Lumen's chonkers.
It's chonky. It's so cool. It doesn't fit on a lot of desks.
They don't care.
These are for people that have huge tables that don't care and they just want to have a cool thing. So that's a splinter that like is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And we probably won't merge that in because most people don't want a machine that big. Most people are already like, the Lumen's getting close to being a little too big, but any smaller, it's not useful. Like, we chose that size very intentionally. So wider, it gets tough, but that's an awesome split. If there's a split that's going, it's more about the energy creating the split.
Yeah.
You know, if that energy is going in a direction that like, and they want it to be merged back into mainline and you know it really can't, make sure they're going the right path to get it back in. Some splits are great. Some you kind of want to set expectations of whether or not it's going to be merged into the main thread. But I like the analogy of it's like, or what are those, the Liechtenstein patterns where you put electricity through a piece of wood and it kind of zaps its way down. That's kind of what it feels like.
I can see that.
Yeah.
It's like one of our points here is like, it's important to say no and give notes on why it's hard to incorporate.
Yeah. Yeah. Clue folks in. Like, if you're just like, no, I'm not doing that, then like, that stinks. You're not giving them any direction there, you know, like clue people in.
Yeah. Saying no without reason too often gets you a hard fork and like split community.
Exactly. The goal is to have everyone be on the same page and be like, we all kind of agree and understand why this is the case. Once we're on speaking a common language and everyone's read the design decisions document, or less people should be kind of on the same page about the direction that it's going because it is sensible. There are some things like, let's say we were being really pig-headed about, we didn't want to change the packaging, but objectively, the machine would be better if we changed something about the design that would require us to change the packaging. We should probably just deal with that, right? Yeah. Like we should find a way. That's a silly reason to not uprev the open source design. We should make the thing better first and foremost. Packaging should always follow the design. We get to put up a little friction if it's going to cause it a huge pain in the butt and the value isn't there. But if the whole community is like, bro, this stinks. Like it should be so much better if you do X, Y, Z. And we're like, but we don't want to change packaging. No, we should suck it up. Like the product comes first and all the dependencies of things come afterwards. So, but balancing that's really hard. So that's going to be a lot of what you kind of have to deal with filtering there. It's tough.
Worth it though.
Totally.
Find the balance.
Totally worth it. Yeah, it's find the balance. If we had to rename this podcast, I'd probably call it that. The number of times we've said finding the balance. I mean, it's not nearly as descriptive as Ohm, but that's so much of what this ends up being is like, you're just trying to balance a lot of things.
It depends.
It depends. Yeah. Yeah.
The balance depends.
Yep.
There you go.
My parents say all the time, they'll always say, we'll see. I love that. There's like, yeah, we'll see what happens. Well, who knows? Well, I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out. I love that. You just kind of got to figure it out.
Yeah. Do you feel good ready to speak towards incorporating feedback?
Yes. Let's move into what it actually looks like taking these notes. Now you've gotten the feedback, you've filtered it. Now it's time to add it to mainline.
Yeah.
So we already mentioned contribution guidelines. So a way to make sure that incorporating feedback and like PRs is really smooth is having your contribution guidelines be super, super thorough. And ideally someone could just make a PR and you just go LGTM merge and it's in the mainline. In reality, that's probably not going to happen all the time because at least for us, our contribution guidelines are they're kind of complicated. We're tracking PCBs, 3D models, a bill of materials, and software in a GitHub repo. It's kind of complicated. You have to use Git LFS locking and blah, 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 blah. It's the only way that we can make it really easy for anyone to add it, but it's still a little clunky. When I say add it, I mean contribute. So you kind of want your contribution guidelines to get out of the way as much as possible. We could do better here because ours are really thorough, but like you look at the contribution page and it's like, wow, that's a lot.
You and I aren't even perfect about following it every time.
Exactly. So like arguably we could reduce that a little bit and then someone makes a PR that's like pretty close. And then, okay, we massage it into place a little bit and that's fine. But make them as thorough as you can without making someone go to that page and go, oh, I don't want to have anything to do with this project. Like, again, a balance, finding out how to get as close as possible to just clicking merge without scaring the heck out of people.
The opposite of that, corollary, like sometimes people aren't going to follow the guidelines and sometimes it's worth dealing with that.
Yes. Just like how some people will drop something into Discord and be like, this is cool. That's a level of contribution. Making a PR that's most of the way there following the contribution guidelines. That's also a contribution. You shouldn't just like be like, no, you didn't do this right and discard it. Like they're still giving you this huge gift with this PR. So you should make exceptions to your contribution rule. It's there as like kind of this idyllic utopia of how people do it. And in practice, it's on especially with a hardware thing. With software, I think you can be a little more strict about it. We have weird contributing guidelines. It's weird to contribute to our project because we have so many other things going on in it.
Yeah,
so
it'd be simple if we had a pure software project, but right now it's all firmware that interfaces with exact hardware versions, that interfaces with exact PCB versions. Like it's messy. A software PR needs to be cognizant of all other things.
Exactly. Yeah. You're making a PR to an architecture, not to a line of code. You know, there's a lot going on. Maybe with some projects we have in the works now that are coming up, we'll be able to experience that a little bit. But for now, it's tough, you know, but so, you know, like I said before, have grace for these folks that are like, they're still trying, right? Like they're doing all this work. It might not follow it perfectly. Be cognizant of that it's hard to do and they're not in your brain. They're not the ones who wrote these contributing guidelines. Like they're trying.
Yeah. And sometimes for us, it means we're pulling out a specific file or an idea from a PR.
Yeah.
Or a Discord message that's maybe it's not mergeable as is, but we're pulling the ethos, the essence of their suggestion,
right,
and incorporating it, like the Stargirl linear rail mod.
Yes.
We ripped the files from mods.opulo, put it into a branch, and then workshopped it until it was mergeable.
Yeah, exactly. Like the contribution guidelines are for making those PRs, but you can also incorporate stuff that's just in the community. Like, and a really good indicator here too is like if someone makes a mod and you see like 3 people do it and then 5 people do it and then 10 people do it. Well, maybe that should be mainline. Let people vote with their implementation. If people are like actually doing that mod, that's a really good sign you should add that thing.
Yeah.
So, just outside of the normal GitHub pipeline, you can just incorporate based on what are people doing. Let's say a whole bunch of people design their own discard bin for the Lumen or something. Okay, that's because it's lacking. We should probably add a discard bin. We're thinking about doing right now. Example.
Or it was pretty telling that people would install a linear rail mod onto their V3 before they built it.
Yeah. A lot of people bought the V3.0, which had rollers. And before they even put it together, they had already put linear rails on it. And we're like, okay, done. And like a couple months later, we had it out. Yep. We integrated it in. So that's a really other strong indicator for incorporating it. And, Thea's linear rail mod, awesome mod. We couldn't quite do it as is. So this is another example of massaging it. It's like, okay, she made a really, really cool thing. You took it, you brought it in, like you said, kind of found a way to make it fit with existing stuff, some printability things, and it's great.
Yep.
And off we go. So, even if it's not in that perfect form, be lenient of that in whatever way it comes and add that sucker in.
Do you think this is harder with pure code? Like understanding other people's code and sculpting it into something usable?
No, I think it's easier with code because you have so many automated tests to make sure that it still passes. Your contribution guidelines are like, does your GitHub CI pass?
Yeah.
You can even have GitHub be like, you make a PR and it's like, hey, it runs a linter automatically on your code, or not a linter, but like some other kind of check on a PR, and it will tell you in the PR. I actually just did this the other day. I made a PR to a software project and it failed the test in the PR. And I was like, oh man, it failed. And I looked at the test and I'm like, oh duh, I didn't edit the test to appropriately test what I changed in the software. And I went and I made that change and I pushed it back up. So it can only in the way that it's fully automated. And I think it's, there's so much culture on GitHub of like software contributions as opposed to hardware contributions. I think it gets easier for people to make those. You don't need to have a 3D printer and have a spool of plastic and send stuff over to your printer and have the circuit board and test it out to mess around with software. You just write the software and run on your computer. It's free to compile.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier with software.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. I think that's my balance there.
I'm not a developer. People think I am often. So I always have to put myself in their shoes and recalibrate how I think of it.
Yeah. Arguably, I'm not either. Depends on who you're talking to.
Yeah. CS minor dropout, right?
There you go. Yeah.
And you know what? If someone's PR doesn't fit in, they've already put in 95% of the energy. I'm sure if you give them a redirection of how to better fit the accepted contribution format, they'll gladly make it.
Yeah, totally. As long as you get your contribution guidelines so that you aren't nuking them from orbit of like, cool, 85% of what you did is not valid and you have to change it. Or like the whole, you based off the wrong branch.
Yeah.
Redo all of it. Like that's what you're trying to avoid. If someone gets really close and it's not quite there, just be like, hey, can you make XYZ change and we'll merge this in? Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's great. Awesome.
I think that's pretty normal for people to experience. Like I've seen so many projects where the maintainer says, hey, contributor, make this change and we'll merge.
Yep.
And it's normal courtesy here.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they'll expect that.
Mm-hmm. And that's how it goes for any open source project. If you make contributions, people will be like, hey, can you make XYZ change? Ideally, you read the contribution guidelines correctly the first time. But if you do mess something up, they'll tell you. Yeah. If a CI tool doesn't tell you already.
But it's rare where I see a maintainer accept a PR from a new contributor without having a change suggestion.
Right. And actually, this is a whole other thing we didn't even talk about, which is, this is kind of in the filtering section. In our contribution guidelines, we say, hey, if you want to make a change, hop into our Discord first and discuss it.
Yeah.
Because if someone is just working in a little bubble of like, I think this feature is great, and then they go off and they work on this big complicated thing that is completely unmergeable because it requires, a kilogram of plutonium to work correctly. And there's no way we're adding plutonium to the bomb. Like, wow, I shouldn't say plutonium to the bomb. Plutonium to the bill of materials. That's funny. You want to cut them off at the pass. You want to be like, hey, we're not adding plutonium to the bill of materials. Hop into the Discord. Let's discuss the whole plutonium situation. Maybe aluminum is acceptable.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need
plutonium
to add
too heavy. We can't
an
ship that.
ITAR restricted, element or whatever. And so having the discussion first is really useful. It depends a lot on how big the project is too. Like I think our Discord's like a little over 4,000 people or something. And like we have a good number of folks, a lot of contributors and stuff. So we can still have people just pop into Discord and discuss an idea pretty easily, and we can field that and, communicate with them that way. With a bigger project, it might be harder. And then that maybe you have to be a little bit more strict of like your contributing guidelines must be like no plutonium. You have it a little more structured. But as a stopgap, as we're still growing, having it just be like, hey, come in and talk to us about it first. Because if it's never going to happen, we want to tell you up front.
Yeah.
And that can also cut some stuff off of the pass and make sure people aren't putting effort into something that may not get merged.
And that speaks towards like this overarching theme here of like keeping the community aligned so that they give you the right feedback you want.
Right.
They help make the right thing the first time around.
Right. Or close to it, down the right path.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Mm-hmm. And it's respectful of their time and energy. Like, help them out. They're trying to help you out. Give them the best chance they can to do something that you're like, LGTM, merge.
Yeah.
That's what you're shooting for. And then once you do this, show it off. Like the fact that someone contributed to your project is so freaking cool. Make a big old stinking fuss about the fact that so-and-so did this thing and added this in. Put them in the release notes. Like, I'll talk about it in a video. There was a really fun video we did about passive feeders, and that whole video was just different community members and different mods they made to make passive feeders. That was a fun one. I should just do a whole video about mods. That'd be really cool.
You should try putting them all on.
Fully modded loom. That's funny. I like that. Yeah, we should do that. But show it off, because not only is that a total hype up for the person that helped you out and made the project better, but it also shows people like, look at this thing that got merged. Continuing to go down that path of showing people like, yes, this community is open to contributions. We merge stuff, it goes into mainline. You make it better for everybody. You're really helping the service of like this thing that anyone can build is better because you added something to it.
Yeah. Understand here too, that no matter how small a contribution may be to the person who added it, it might be a major section on their resume. It might be a 15-minute discussion that in a job interview that gets them their dream job.
Yes.
Like, it's really important to celebrate this stuff and to like recognize it and show appreciation.
It is like the amount of effort to get from no contribution to a contribution is tremendous.
Yeah.
The scale of the contribution still does matter. It's like, it's a metric, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that they put a foot forward and said, hey, I want to do this, I'm trying to put this thing in there, is the biggest leap. It's such a big arc. So like hyping people, celebrating that as much as you possibly can is, I think, such the move there. Show that you're grateful. You should be. Someone gave a flying brick about what you did and they're trying to help it and contribute to it. You should be so stoked about that. You should share that so hard. Like, that's such a great thing. So celebrating that and being grateful for it is like a requirement. Like, that's such a big part of this too.
All right, that's it for this one. A quick thing before we go, we have a little public service announcement. We have a new way to engage with the podcast. You can now email feedback and topic suggestions to podcast@opulo.io.
OPULO.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to leave a review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps us out a ton. You can find Opulo on Twitter and Instagram. And please don't forget to check out opulo.io and sign up for our newsletter where we write blog posts and do customer interviews with other folks building open hardware. That's it, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
No, I was just giving myself the hook.
Okay.
Oh, I guess you do the hook. Yeah, sure. Give me a hook. Whatever. Give me a hook.
I'm channeling my salesman.